Ambassador Thess Corvillin had attended 41 interspecies cultural exchanges across her diplomatic career, and none of them had ever ended with 3 Ithran delegates collapsed on the concert hall floor, weeping uncontrollably, while a human cellist stood frozen mid-performance, bow still raised, utterly bewildered by what she had apparently just done to an entire room of alien dignitaries. Sophia Callahan had not intended to cause an incident. She had been invited, as part of Earth's routine cultural exchange program with the newly contacted Ithran Compact, to perform a single piece, Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, at a reception meant to showcase human artistic achievement to a species whose own culture, by every briefing document Sophia had received beforehand, valued precision and restraint above almost everything else. She had played the piece exactly as she'd played it 1,000 times before, the same measured, controlled phrasing she'd spent 2 decades perfecting, and had gotten no further than the third movement before the reaction began, subtle at first, a strange rippling shudder passing through the assembled Ithran delegation, then considerably less subtle, 3 delegates sliding from their seats entirely, overcome by something that Sophia, watching in growing horror from the small raised platform, could only describe afterward as looking uncomfortably close to a species-wide seizure. "Stop," Ambassador Corvillin said, moving fast across the hall floor toward the fallen delegates, her own voice carrying an urgency that cut through the stunned silence that had followed the collapse. "Ms. Callahan, please, stop playing now." Sophia had already stopped, bow lowered, cello clutched against her chest with the particular protective instinct of a musician whose instrument had suddenly, inexplicably, become something considerably more dangerous than she had ever understood it to be. The Ithran, Earth's own xenobiology division, would explain in the tense, closed-door briefing convened within hours of the incident, process sound in a manner unlike anything human neuroscience had previously encountered among contacted species, where human hearing converted vibration into electrical signals processed, eventually, into conscious perception of pitch and rhythm. Ithran auditory processing operated on a far more direct pathway, sound patterns triggering immediate, unfiltered emotional response with almost no cognitive buffer between stimulus and reaction. It was, Ithran neurologists would later explain to a considerably more receptive human audience, a trait that had shaped their entire civilization's relationship with sound. Ithran music itself built around narrow, carefully controlled tonal ranges, specifically designed never to trigger the kind of overwhelming emotional flood that untrained, unfiltered sound patterns could produce in an unprepared Ithran nervous system. Your cello's tonal range, combined with the specific harmonic layering in the piece you performed, produced an emotional response in our delegates that our own neurology has no natural defense against, explained Ithran cultural liaison Vel Ashran in the considerably more clinical briefing that followed the incident's immediate aftermath, addressing a small, anxious gathering of human diplomatic and scientific staff. "I want to be clear that this was not, in any sense, an intentional attack. But I must also be clear about the scale of what actually occurred. The 3 delegates who collapsed experienced what our own medical texts describe as emotional overload, a state in which unfiltered feeling arrives faster than the mind can process or regulate it. It is, for our species, genuinely dangerous. Sustained exposure, our physicians believe, could produce lasting neurological harm. I am obligated to inform you that the Compact Security Council is treating this incident with considerable seriousness, and that a formal classification review has already begun." That review, completed 6 weeks later, produced a ruling that Sophia Callahan would spend the following year privately, quietly furious about. However carefully she kept that fury out of every public statement she made on the subject. Human music, in all its recorded and live forms, was formally classified by the Ithran Compact Security Council as a Category 3 neurological hazard, restricted from any future transmission or performance within Ithran territory absent explicit, individually reviewed security clearance, a classification that placed box cello suites by the letter of Ithran law in the same regulatory category as several genuinely weaponized sonic technologies developed during the Compact's own long, difficult history of internal conflict. They're not entirely wrong to be cautious, Sophia admitted, in the interview she gave to an Earth broadcast journalist 8 months after the incident, her voice carrying the particular weary frustration of someone who had spent the better part of a year defending an art form against a label she found both understandable and deeply painful. "I've read the medical reports. I've talked to the delegates who collapsed, once they'd recovered enough to talk about it. What happened to them was real, and it was frightening, and I don't think anybody on the human side of this has the right to just wave that away because we didn't mean any harm by it. But I also think something's been lost in how this whole thing got classified, and it bothers me more than I probably should let it. Calling music a weapon isn't wrong exactly. It's just incomplete. A knife's a weapon too if you use it that way. It's also how you cut bread for your kids' lunch. I don't think anybody's quite figured out yet how to hold both of those truths about what I do for a living at the same time. And until they do, I'm stuck being the woman who accidentally hurt 3 alien diplomats with a piece of music my own grandmother used to hum to me before I could even talk." The incident that would eventually force that reckoning and reshape the Compact's entire understanding of what human music actually was arrived 19 months later on a joint human-Ithran research outpost stationed at the edge of Compact space, under circumstances considerably more dangerous than any diplomatic reception. The outpost's mixed research staff, 41 humans and 63 Ithran scientists studying an unusual stellar phenomenon at the system's edge, had no advance warning when the Threll Remnant, a splinter faction of a defeated interstellar power that had spent the preceding decade operating as scattered raiders across the Compact's outer territories, struck the outpost's defense grid with a weapon neither species had previously encountered outside classified threat assessments. A neural disruption broadcast, calibrated with devastating precision against Ithran auditory-emotional processing, designed specifically to induce the same catastrophic emotional overload that had felled 3 delegates in a concert hall 19 months earlier, but deliberately amplified, sustained, and weaponized against an entire station's Ithran population at once. 63 casualties within the first 4 minutes. The outpost's chief medical officer, a Ithran physician named Das Ren, would later testify before the Compact's Emergency Security Council, his voice carrying the particular flat exhaustion of someone recounting the worst day of his professional life. Every Ithran staff member on that station collapsed simultaneously, incapacitated by an emotional overload so severe that 11 required immediate life support intervention. Our own defensive countermeasures, designed around 3 centuries of internal Compact conflict, proved entirely inadequate against a weapon calibrated this precisely against our species-specific neurological vulnerability. We were, within 4 minutes, functionally disabled as a fighting or even a coordinating force, and the Threll Remnant's boarding parties were already inbound. What the Threll Remnant had not accounted for, in a raid meticulously planned around exploiting Ithran neurology, was the outpost's small human contingent, and among that contingent, a junior research technician named Marcus Whitfield who had, in his off-duty hours, spent the preceding 8 months teaching himself guitar from a battered instrument. He'd smuggled aboard against station regulations specifically forbidding personal music devices. Out of an abundance of caution, the Compact's security review had insisted upon following the Callahan incident. "I didn't have a plan," Marcus would admit, in the account he gave to Earth defense investigators weeks later, still visibly shaken by what he'd been part of. "I heard the alarms, I heard people screaming, and I found Das Ren in the main corridor, barely conscious, trying to give orders nobody could process because every Ithran on that station was drowning in whatever that broadcast was doing to them. I didn't know what to do. I'm not military. I'm not a doctor." I just had my guitar, because I'd been playing it in my quarters 10 minutes before the attack started, and some instinct I still can't fully explain told me that if their own neurology processes sound as raw, unfiltered emotion, maybe the right kind of sound could push back against whatever wrong kind of sound was currently drowning them. He was, according to the outpost's own recovered sensor logs, entirely correct, though the mechanism behind his instinct would take compact neurologists the better part of a year to fully understand. The Threll Remnant's neural disruption broadcast operated by flooding Ithran auditory emotional pathways with chaotic, arrhythmic sonic patterns specifically designed to overwhelm the mind's capacity to process feeling into coherent thought, a kind of engineered emotional white noise calibrated to produce total cognitive paralysis. Marcus Whitfield's guitar, playing a slow, deliberate, achingly simple melody he'd learned from his own grandfather years before he'd ever left Earth, introduced something the weaponized broadcast had never accounted for: coherent emotional structure, a pattern the overwhelmed Ithran mind could actually latch onto and follow, a single clear thread of feeling cutting through the chaotic flood the Threll Remnant's weapon had unleashed. "I remember it as drowning," Das Ren would later testify, describing the 4 minutes of the attack from his own perspective, still barely conscious on the corridor floor. "Every feeling I have ever experienced, all at once, with no order, no structure, no way to tell one from another. And then, somewhere in the middle of that drowning, I heard something with a shape to it. 6 notes, repeating, simple, deliberate. It was the first thing in those 4 minutes that felt like it was going somewhere instead of simply overwhelming everything at once, and I found myself, without any conscious decision to do so, following it, the way you might follow a single light in absolute darkness. It did not stop the flood, but it gave my mind something to hold onto inside it, and that proved to be enough." Marcus played for 11 straight minutes, moving through the station's central corridor as Threll Remnant boarding parties began cutting through the outer airlock, his guitar the only clear, structured sound in a station otherwise drowning in engineered chaos. And by the time the boarding parties actually breached the corridor, they found something they had not remotely planned for. A station's worth of Ithran defenders, disoriented but no longer fully incapacitated, beginning, one by one, to regain enough coherent function to fight back. Anchored by 6 simple notes, a human research technician had learned from his grandfather and never once imagined using for anything more significant than quiet evenings alone in his quarters. The outpost held. Earth defense reinforcements arrived 4 hours later to find the Threll Remnant's boarding parties repelled, the station's Ithran staff recovering under the care of their own medical team, and Marcus Whitfield, guitar still in hand, sitting, exhausted against the corridor wall beside Das Ren, both of them alive by a margin considerably narrower than either felt entirely comfortable discussing afterward. The Compact's Security Council convened its emergency review 11 days later, and Ambassador Thes Corvalin, invited to testify alongside Das Ren and a hastily summoned Sophia Callahan, found herself, for the first time since the original incident 19 months earlier, arguing a position she had spent that entire year privately believing, but never quite finding the standing to voice. "We classified human music as a hazard because we saw, firsthand, how catastrophically it could overwhelm our own neurology when introduced without warning or structure," she told the assembled council. That classification was not wrong, exactly. What happened in that concert hall was real and dangerous, and I do not believe any of us should pretend otherwise simply because of what happened on that outpost. But I believe we made an error nearly as serious as underestimating the danger, which was assuming danger and value were mutually exclusive categories. The very same trait that made Ms. Callahan's performance genuinely hazardous to an unprepared Ithran audience is the trait that allowed a single human amateur, playing a simple melody he learned from his own grandfather, to give 63 drowning Ithran minds something coherent to hold onto during the worst 4 minutes of their lives. I do not think we can continue treating this as a hazard to be restricted without exception. I think we have to begin treating it, carefully, deliberately, the way we treat every genuinely powerful tool this compact has ever encountered. As something requiring respect and training and considerable care, rather than blanket prohibition. Sophia Callahan, called to testify immediately after, chose her words with the particular careful precision of someone who had spent 19 months thinking about almost nothing else. "I want to say something that might sound strange, given everything that's happened," she told the council. "I'm not angry that you were afraid of what I do. You had every right to be, after what happened in that concert hall. I've spent 19 months trying to make peace with the fact that something I've loved my whole life, something that's never once felt like a weapon to me, genuinely hurt people who never did anything to deserve it. But I think what happened on that outpost proves something I always believed and never had the standing to argue, which is that the same reason music can hurt is the exact same reason it can heal or steady somebody, or give a drowning mind one clear thing to hold on to in the dark. That's not a contradiction. It's just what it actually means for something to be powerful. I'd ask this council to consider training your people, carefully, gradually, the way you'd train anyone approaching something genuinely significant for the first time, rather than deciding the only safe response to power is to refuse it outright. I think Marcus Whitfield's grandfather taught him 6 notes on a guitar, never once imagining they'd save 63 lives someday. I'd like the chance to teach a few more people, on your side and mine, exactly how much good those 6 notes could still do, if we're willing to approach them with the same care instead of the same fear." The Compact's Security Council revised its classification 11 weeks later, replacing the outright prohibition with a structured training and licensing program developed jointly by human musicians and Ithran neurologists, designed to introduce Ithran audiences gradually to human musical structures under carefully controlled, medically supervised conditions, beginning with the simplest, most emotionally coherent pieces available and building, over months of careful exposure, toward the fuller complexity of pieces like the one that had originally caused the incident. Sophia Callahan performed the same Bach suite again, 2 years after the original concert hall incident, this time before a small, carefully prepared Ithran audience who had spent 6 months building tolerance under professional supervision. And this time, when she reached the 3rd movement, the reaction in the room was entirely different. Several delegates visibly moved, one weeping quietly but without any of the catastrophic collapse that had marked her first attempt, all of them, by the concert's end, offering the particular reverent silence that Vel Ashran would later describe, in his own account of the evening, as the closest thing his species possessed to genuine artistic awe. "You were right to call it dangerous," Sophia told him afterward, packing away her cello with hands that were, for the first time in 2 years, entirely steady. "I've made my peace with that. I just hope now you'll also let it be the other thing it's always been for us too." "I believe we already have," Vel Ashran said, watching the last of the assembled delegates file out, several still visibly moved by what they'd just experienced. Marcus Whitfield's 6 notes taught this entire compact something we very nearly refused to learn out of fear alone, that the things capable of hurting us most deeply are so often, if approached with enough care and enough respect, the very same things capable of saving us. I do not think we will ever again make the mistake of believing those 2 truths belonged in separate categories.